Hello and welcome to The Nation. I'm Pasha Rahim. On this episode, we'll be highlighting one of the greatest challenges of our lifetimes, climate change, and does nuclear power have a role in our climate change strategy? Can nuclear energy really help save the climate? To discuss further, in the studio I have with me Dr. Muhammad SYUKRI YAHYA, the Director of Institute of Nuclear Energy from Universiti Tenaga Nasional, better known as UNITEN. Welcome to The Nation, Doctor. Thanks for being with us today to talk about nuclear energy. Now, whenever we mention the word nuclear, there's always a very negative perception. People immediately think about nuclear weapons. And one of the things that we want to talk about today is to destigmatize the idea of nuclear energy. Now, nuclear energy is obviously one of the it's a clean and renewable energy source. And, in this climate, when we talk about climate change and etc., one of the biggest contributors to climate change is fossil fuels. And a large percentage of the energy or the power that we get in this country is from fossil fuels. How do you think this impacts climate change? Let's start with that.
Okay, when we talk about climate change, we are talking about the change in climate that's like now. We are feeling the heat wave. It's scorching hot nowadays outside. When I went back to Kelantan and Tenaga for my Hari Raya, I barely survived. Okay, so that is one of the symptoms, I would say, of climate change. So people are feeling more agitated and they are feeling more exhausted. They are experiencing this heat-related illness. Okay, so this climate change affect us in many ways. Okay, for example, we are experiencing more frequent and more intense flood in the nation, heat wave, and this flood and heat wave, when they become more frequent, when they become more intense, they leads to a lot of damages to the infrastructure, to the communities, to the economies. For example, in terms of infrastructure, flood submerge houses and buildings underwater, and that disrupt people lifestyle, and they stop students from going to school. They take away the mobility of people. So all of this affect the productivity of the nation, and in the end, it's affect our lifestyle.
Yeah. So when we talk about energy, obviously it's something that we cannot live without, because everything runs on electricity. Seeing as how our country greatly depends on fossil fuels for now to generate electricity, apart from hydro and solar powered energy, we're looking at nuclear energy. How, first of all, a lot of us, or many of us, might not really understand nuclear energy because, like I said earlier, there's always a negative connotation to the word nuclear. Can you, walk us through that and perhaps explain to us, what nuclear energy is, how it works, etc.?
Okay, thanks, Pasha. Very good question. Actually, it is understandable. People put a negative label on nuclear because nuclear was announced to the world in the 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that is very understood. Okay. However, when we go to the basics of nuclear energy is basically the energy that is harnessed from the inside of an atom. So you can either split up the nucleus of a heavy element, something like uranium, plutonium, or you can fuse like element together. And all of this energy is actually can be approximate or explained by the famous Albert Einstein equation E equal to mc squared, which I think you are expert in.
Far from being an expert, maybe you could explain to us a little bit more on that.
Okay, so what happened is basically, for example, there are 2 ways, one is fusion and one is fission. What we are doing basically in commercial power sector now is we are using fission reaction.
Okay.
So in fission reaction, you have this pile of uranium, and then you bombard this pile with neutrons. So you can imagine it's like a light.
Like a light spark?
Yeah, for example, like that.
Okay.
But there's no fire involved. So what happened is this uranium is converted or is split into smaller fragments, and then in this conversion, we generate heat. So the uranium is in the canister, it stays there, becoming different element, but it generates heat. So the canister become hot, and you use this heat generated to boil water. So in the end, you can see nuclear reactor is just like an exotic boiler. So you boil water, you got steam, you channel that into steam turbine, you rotate your steam turbine with the connected to generator, and you get electricity. And this heat also can be used to flush steam, to desalinate water, or you can use it to for hydrolysis of hydrogen. So there are many ways to use of this heat from the nuclear fission.
Right. So when we talk about nuclear energy being a source of power, you know, with coal and with gas, obviously there are emissions. Is that the case with nuclear?
No, actually, that's interesting because when we talk about coal and fossil fuel, we are breaking. I mean, is a molecule of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and you are breaking apart the bonds between this molecule, and then you get carbon and oxygen combined, become carbon dioxide, and it's produced the carbon that we don't want. In nuclear, we don't have carbon. I mean, there's zero carbon emission at all during this heat generation.
Right.
So you can say it's very clean in terms of carbon emission.
Okay. So in relation to this very clear explanation that you've just told us about how nuclear produces energy, how does that help in addressing climate change? Like, how is it better for us as a country maybe to move towards using nuclear as opposed to using, you know, whatever power source that we are having now?
Okay. So when we talk about climate change, it is a consensus in the scientific community that climate change is directly, the root of the climate change is the greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
And this example of greenhouse gases are carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, methane, and some other gases. Okay, and these carbon are mostly produced during the combustion of fossil fuel. So if we can reduce the concentration of carbon in our atmosphere, we can help mitigate the impact of climate change. So there are ways to reduce this carbon concentration. One way is to get rid of the carbon. That can happen by the photosynthesis of plants. So if you recall, trees, they absorb carbon dioxide with the sunlight, and they produce oxygen and food, sugar. And then that one way. So you can have trees, which is a machine that absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, or the direct way is just to reduce less fossil fuel, which combusts and makes carbon dioxide. So in that way, instead of burning fossil fuel, we have a good clean alternative, which is nuclear energy.
Okay, talking about clean and renewable energy, we also currently already have hydro and also solar as one of our sources of electricity. Why is nuclear better than these two?
I will never say nuclear is better than renewable energy. I like hydropower very much. Anyway, renewable energy has its limitation. Renewable energy, for example, in Malaysia, the only viable renewable energy sources are solar and biomass. Okay, when we talk about biomass, we are turning waste of agricultural and waste of industries into fuel, and you burn things. When you burn things, you still produce carbon. Even though the term is carbon neutral, you still emit carbon in biomass. And in terms of solar, its limitation is it doesn't produce electricity when the sun is not shining at night, when the day is raining, when it's cloudy, when it's a hazy season, and when it's too hot also, it doesn't produce electricity as much.
Okay.
So there are limitations. So currently what we have in our country, when the sun is not shining, we want to maximize the installed capacity of solar. But when the sun is not shining, we are relying on the reserve margin in the grid, which is basically the combustion of fossil fuel. So instead of having renewable energy being backed up by fossil fuel, it would be more wise, in my opinion, to have renewable energy and back up by nuclear power as the base load. Nuclear also is available. I mean, it can be used for other application. On top of, in addition to power generation, can use for many other applications, something like water desalination,
Right.
or industrial heat.
Okay, so so there are many other uses of nuclear apart from just generating power. Okay, we're going to talk about nuclear energy or nuclear power plants. But before that, we're going to take a very short break, and we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. You're back with me on The Nation, and we are talking to Dr. SYUKRI about using nuclear energy as a source of generating power in the country. So, Doctor, let's jump straight back into our conversation. Now, when we talk about nuclear energy, obviously we'll need to have nuclear power plants. However, last year, the head of the International Renewable Energy Agency said that new nuclear power plants are not the answer to climate change, and that new nuclear power plants will take too long to build, and government should not rely on them to play a part in avoiding climate change. And some of the things he said is that the only thing that matters when investing in clean energy is whether the technology provides results in this decade. So we're talking about fast action. So, you know, he's saying that if we were to invest in building nuclear power plants, it's going to take too long, and by that time, you know, it may not solve anything at all. He gave an example of a plant in Finland which was connected to the grid in March after a delay of more than a decade. So what is your take, or what's your opinion on this?
Thank you, Pasha, for highlighting this. In the context of Malaysia, I strongly disagree with that opinion. That's because first, like we have mentioned earlier, in current energy scenario in Malaysia, we have renewable and being backed up by the reserve margin from the combustion of fossil fuel.
Okay.
So it is better for us to act now, okay, and replace the fossil fuel with nuclear. That one thing. And second thing, that's true that nuclear takes a long time to build, but we have also to know that the life cycle or lifetime of nuclear reactor is about 60 to 80 years. So that's a pretty long time. I mean, you wait about 10 years to build it, and then you can run it for 60 to 80 years.
Yeah.
What does that mean is we are not solving our own problem only. We are also solving problems of our children and grandchildren, because nuclear power is 80 years in the running, so it's helping our future generation solving or mitigating climate change as well. So even though we don't get nuclear power as soon as now, but doing now is better than doing nothing about nuclear.
What do you think is the current state of nuclear energy production around the world, and how does this vary by country or by region? For Malaysia, for example, do you think we are ready to make the switch from fossil fuels to nuclear?
Okay, in terms of global nuclear power, I mean, there are about 400 plus nuclear power reactors currently in operation. 1/4 of them are in the America, USA.
Right.
And then we have many in Japan about 50, China, Korea, France, and many countries in Europe. And a lot of new development in nuclear power is actually happening in Asia.
Right.
And we are talking about ASEAN. Countries like Singapore, they are thinking about adding nuclear power into their system in 2050. Indonesia is really serious about being involved in nuclear power. They are actually offering themselves as a first of a kind or experimental site for many reactor design. And then we also have Vietnam and Philippines opening up themselves to nuclear power. And then in terms of Malaysia, are we ready? If you ask me, we have actually started our first step towards nuclear energy program back in 2011. We established Malaysia Nuclear Power Corporation, MNPC, which is acting as a NEPIO. We call it NEPIO, Nuclear Energy Program Implementation Organization, which is as suggested, recommended by the international body, IAEA. So this MNPC has been running the show, I would say. They have been coordinating and doing very good job. And their subject matter expert has been recognized as exemplary for newcomer countries. So sadly, MMPC was disbanded in 2019, but throughout its 8 years of life, they have been doing a lot of studies, and one of the studies, they highlight that there are 4 key areas that Malaysia have to work on to prepare ourselves to embrace nuclear energy. I would say one is public acceptance. We still need to convince. We need to buy in from the people. The second thing, we need to improve our regulation. The current regulation right now that we have is not enough and not sufficient to cater for the nuclear power industry. But with MNPC, the team has actually developed or drafted a very good act, and then it was just waited to be tabled in the parliament, but sadly it doesn't happen. And then after that, we need about siting. Once we say go or no go, when we say go, we have to secure the site, the correct site, and then we also have manpower capability. So in terms of our readiness at 2019, we are at there are 3 phases of nuclear power implementation. We are at phase 0. We are about to jump into phase 1. That jump will happen when the government say go. But because of the change of government in 2018, and then there was change of opinion in the government and policy, so it doesn't happen. So I would say we are almost there.
Doctor, so the government has recently announced a goal of achieving net zero by the year 2050, and also TNB has announced that they will no longer be building new coal power plants. What is Malaysia's current and also projected energy needs? And as far as your opinion goes, do you think we need nuclear power? And if we do, how soon should that be implemented?
Currently, our generation capacity is about 22,000 megawatt. And we are using about 15 to 16,000 maximum demand daily. And we are expecting the demand to grow just because first our population grow, and then second thing, we are hungry for power. Last time, I remember when I was small, to have a TV in our house, we need a license. But right now, you can see if you go to houses, there are 2 or 3 TVs easily in many households in Malaysia. Secondly, smartphones. Everybody has smartphone. Even my son, he uses smartphone every day. You can see that the demand for energy is increasing. So what we have now, maybe we have good margin, 15,000 to about 22,000, but the demand is growing, and at the same time there are power plants that needs to be retired. Old power plants need to be retired and needs to be replaced. But since the MB has decided there will be no new coal power plant, so the only viable or only logical alternative to me for baseload power generation is nuclear. That's because first thing, the solar is intermittent. And then second thing, the focus of solar in Malaysia right now is in the large solar farm. So what they do is they cut down trees or palm trees, and they put in solar power. And when that happens, we are actually removing our factory that absorb carbon and produce oxygen. So it's counterproductive
to mitigating climate change.
Exactly. So in the end, what I think the best will be to use the areas that is not used. For example, roof of houses and buildings. Install your solar panel, or in the lake that doesn't. In some lakes you can put in solar panels, but don't cut down trees.
Okay, Doctor. How do you think, what do you think the government should do, or policymakers of the government? What are some of the efforts that should be done in order for them to alleviate? Because earlier on we said, one of the things that we need to do in order for us to move towards nuclear energy is to get public opinion, and the word that we used earlier was to destigmatize nuclear energy. What do you think, in your opinion, should be done by the government and the policymakers in order for us to be able to move forward and for people to be more accepting of nuclear energy?
I think in terms of policy on nuclear energy right now in Malaysia, we have no decision. So that's one thing. It's sad to have no decision on a matter. So first thing I would suggest for the government, just study, learn about nuclear energy, because kalau tak kenal maka tak cinta.
Right.
So I think you have to study the goodness or the disadvantages of nuclear energy and balance it out and see whether it's worth to pursue or not. And once you commit, really commit, because like we talked earlier, the construction or the building of nuclear energy takes 10 to 12 years, which is 2 or 3 election time. So you don't want to commit today and then the next election the new government come in and change your decision. So for us to have a policy on nuclear, it has to be consistent and it has to be regardless of whoever in the Putrajaya. So we have to have a policy that is set in stone in a way related to nuclear energy. Okay, and then to convince our public, we need to help people to understand.
Right.
I mean, right now it's easy to misunderstand nuclear.
So it's ongoing education, and it's going to take a while to get there, but hopefully, if and when the government does decide to move on to nuclear energy, we will be able to do that. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Shukri. We hope our viewers can learn a few things about nuclear energy today, and that's all the time that we have with Dr. Muhammad Shukri. Thank you once again, the Director of Institute of Nuclear Energy from UNITEN. I'm Pasha Rahim. Thanks for watching The Nation. We'll see you again next time.